Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Daiyan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Daiyan Wolkenstein, we are just over 2 weeks until the Chargers officially return to training camp, open to the fans, premiering their new training facility at the Bolt in El Segundo. My God, if I haven't said it the last few episodes that we have been on here, we need football back in the worst possible way, because these are the doldrum days that are worse, honestly, than between when the season ends to the NFL draft. It's really bad in these days between June and July. We are craving for the NFL to return.
Yeah, and I feel like when football doesn't happen, like other things that you don't want to happen can creep in. And so I don't know about folks out there, but 4th of July was great. You know, I hope everybody enjoyed their time. But let me tell you, like Jake and I have had, we've had a day. It's only Monday.
Oh, yeah.
I almost burned the house down on 4th of July with a smoker. Then fast forward, my wife's car overheats. So just picked her up. It's hot out there in Southern California. Everyone's putting out fires, literally and proverbially here, Jake. So here we are talking Chargers football, trying to bob and weave through the daily life struggles.
Indeed. That's how it goes.
So today's episode, we wanted to kind of get into, and this isn't like a hype video, right? We don't want to sit here and drink the Kool-Aid. But what we wanted to do was go through some of the players on this team, because there's a lot riding on the successes of a lot of players, both veterans and rookies and everything in between. But what if player X had a banner career year, and which players, if they were to do so, would impact this team's success the most? So, for example, let's say Josh Palmer balls out, has a career year. Would that impact this team more in terms of success than if Derwin James has a career year this year? All that we'll discuss here as we go through here, Jake. Before we do that, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to the top fights of the UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are currently being played. When the game is over, head on over to the online casino and get in on the game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. Just use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for over $250. Bet online, the game starts here.
And last thing before we get into it, Jake, we have the fundraising event down in San Diego. We have on 7/21, July 21st. Jake and I will be there, brought to you by Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. Back to school fundraiser event with Charles Lohi Gilman, Rashawn Slater, Cornelius Johnson, Quentin Jammer, and more. What they're doing for every item or signature purchased, 2 backpacks full of school supplies will be donated to kids as we head back to school. Details are going to be in a tweet that we'll have pinned on our Twitter handle, LAC_unleashed. Again, I believe you can ship in your items to be signed as well. Again, for more details, just DM us, message us in the comments so we can get you more info, get that over to you. But if you're local, LA, San Diego, anywhere in between, San Diego, 7/21/24, put the date on your calendar. Hope to see you guys there. Jake, let's get going. Lot riding on this team, and there's a lot of names that we're all expecting and putting a lot of stock into having breakout or better seasons than years past. But let's kind of set the stage here with what we mean. Joe Alt, Junior Colston, Ladd McConkey, these guys, they could have breakout seasons, right? But that's not really what we're talking about, breakout seasons. We're talking about having like career years. So ones, if they were to eclipse what their best year was prior, which one of those players would impact this team's ability to win the most? And it's, while everyone might jump at, oh, it's Justin Herbert, it's not. We've seen Justin Herbert have crazy stats, crazy years only to fall short due to injury and all of the other things that have plagued this team. So what are the players that, if relied upon and answering the bell, bringing out career years, could bring this team, I don't know, wild card spot, AFC West title, championship contention, who knows? Jake, where do you want to start with this one? Who's kind of the name that kind of comes to mind for you first?
When we started having this conversation about this topic that we wanted to have on the pod, my immediate thought went to Josh Palmer. And I think with Josh Palmer, it makes so much sense for him, not just from the standpoint of, yes, along with DJ Chark, he's the veteran of this young wide receiver group, but he's the one that has the most rapport with Justin Herbert. This is going into his 4th season. It's a career year for him. And to be perfectly honest, I think that his skill set, from what we've seen from him thus far, he's going to benefit the most out of this group in terms of the potential to have that breakout year. Now, a lot of people can make a lot of different arguments for this wide receiver group. As Dan said, we're not putting Ladd McConkey into this just because it's a rookie season. We haven't seen anything prior to, even though we both think that he's greatly going to benefit in this offense. And we've already heard about the type of connection that he's been having with Justin Herbert through minicamp and OTAs thus far. Quentin Johnston, there's big expectations for him to take that next step. I could see an argument to be made for DJ Chark as well, considering how long he's been in the league. He hasn't been to his last big season. Pro Bowl was in 2019, hasn't eclipsed 700 yards in the last 4 years. But with Josh Palmer, I just feel like this is the opportunity that he's been waiting for. For the past 3 years, he's been behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as it relates to the depth chart. Definitely as it relates to one of the more underrated targets. But when Keenan was out or when Mike was out, Josh Palmer stepped up. And I don't think that it was noticed enough because the Chargers, unfortunately, didn't win a lot of games over the past 2 years, over the last year. And even when you had those
in 2 years, honestly, yeah.
Well, I mean, you take it back, 2 years ago, you had the playoff debacle in Jacksonville, so you were able to do that. But at the same token, I don't think that he's been appreciated as much as he should have been in those moments where you step up, because we know where Justin Herbert was throwing the ball or who was carrying the ball. And Joshua Palmer kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. So for Joshua Palmer going into his final contract year for the Chargers, I think it's going to be a motivation enough for him to know that he really wants to stand out. It sounds like he's ready to take on that leadership role, being the most tenured player out of this entire wide receiver group with the Chargers. And again, I go back to the system for what Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are going to, bring to the scheme that they want Justin Herbert to play. Obviously rely a lot on the run game. It may turn into much more of a frequency of a shorter field for guys like Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey to really thrive in. And I think because of that and those frequency of the opportunities, that's where it's really going to benefit Joshua Palmer. So I think that it's a great indication for him. I think that there should be those type of expectations to be put on his shoulders, and everything that we know from Joshua Palmer just being the very kind of quiet, humble guy, lets his play speak for himself when he's out there. I think this is a great opportunity for him to do it, and I would love to see it happen.
Yeah, and again, to put it in perspective, so Josh Palmer, 2022, that was when he filled in a ton of games, 103 targets, almost 800 yards, 799 yards, 3 touchdowns. So career year would be eclipsing 800 yards and 3 touchdowns and 103 targets, 74 receptions. That seems doable. And we'll get into some of the other players here that might be surprises to folks. But Jake, if I were to tell you that one of 2 receivers had 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns between Josh Palmer and DJ Chark, which one of those do you think would be more impactful to the team's success in winning? Because I think those numbers would, to the eye test, look different on the field.
Sure. And obviously going back to DJ Chark's Pro Bowl season, which is what you're talking about in that circumstance. Yes, I could totally understand when you look at the stats like that. how it's going to benefit. I think I only put it in this type of circumstance because you go back to 2019, DJ Chark, who were the rest of the wide receivers of the Jacksonville Jaguars at that point in time? Now the Chargers essentially, they go from having 4 rostered wide receivers to essentially too many. And I think that there is a considerable plan by Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman to get so many of these guys involved. Dan, we've even talked about, there's talk about the Chargers even keeping 7 wide receivers. I don't see that happening. I think the max they can keep is 6, considering where you have to put your priorities at other positions. But in that circumstance, along with you have potentially 4 running backs in the backfield that you're going to hand the ball off to, because there's only one football. I'm not saying that it wouldn't necessarily benefit to have those stats, because obviously it would. But I think who's going to have the better opportunity to have a better season between Joshua Palmer and DJ Chark, knowing everything I know about this offense, I would put my money on Joshua Palmer.
Let's put your GM hat on for a sec. Let's say which one of the, let's put the bar at, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Okay. If you are the GM of the Chargers, which one are you bringing back? That's tough.
So basically, if you're asking if both receivers ended up with the same stats, which one would I bring back?
Yeah, who would you rather have back?
I would probably, again, lean toward Joshua Palmer.
I think
he's a little bit more versatile in his route tree of where you can place him out there on the field. And again, the rapport that he's already has with Justin Herbert, 3 years under his belt and familiarity. That's where I would go. Not saying that DJ Chark can't do that. He's obviously done it before. He has not had a season that has eclipsed over 700 yards since 2020. The last 2, he's gone over 500. And he's in a familiar scheme with Sanjay Lal as his wide receiver coach, even though that was probably his worst statistical season. I think that his season was cut short due to injuries that year. But still, if I was to put my money on who I would trust to get those stats more, I would say it's Josh Palmer.
I think you're right. I think I would agree with that. Next one on my list, Jake, I think this might be a surprise to folks, but I think this would alleviate a lot of maybe some of the stresses that Chargers fans have. And I'm going to go Hayden Hurst. And I do think that he is being kind of slept on. And I think a lot of really, really, really good quarterbacks in this league benefit from a really good relationship with a good tight end. And you look at what Baltimore's done, you look at what San Francisco's done, Kansas City's done, Detroit's done. You look at, so many of the juggernaut teams. Now look what Buffalo brought in, with the Dalton Kincaid that they brought, Dawson Knox as well. Like, there's tight ends are really important, and it can really kind of become a cheat code. And if Hayden Hurst can have a breakout season, and I'm talking his career year right now is 571. If I'm being honest, I'd be shocked if he doesn't go over 571 in this offense, given the style of offense that they have and given what this coaching staff has talked about Hayden Hurst. But when we're reframing this in which one of these would impact this team's ability to win the most, that's huge to have a tight end that could break out, have a career year in a year in which you're still trying to kind of retool and reorganize, reshuffle your wide receiver deck a little bit here. And so it's a bit of a transition year for your wide receivers. You got some kind of prove it years. You got some unknowns with Quentin Johnston. You've got rookie Ladd McConkey. You're not sure what's going to go on with Cornelius Johnson and Brendan Rice. You've got the new Blazer they signed for a 3-year deal. If you can get stability from a tight end perspective for Justin Herbert, give him that safety valve, I think that would bode very well for this Chargers offense to succeed and be balanced. You don't want to be relying on your rookie receiver or the guy who gets hurt all the time or the ones who's been hurt for the most part for a few years or 6th and 7th or 7th round draft picks. you want to rely on the guys who have been in the NFL, who have been tried, true, and tested. Hayden Hurst, to me, if he succeeds and has a career year, let's say 800 yards, 8 touchdowns, that spells a great sign for this Chargers offense.
Yeah, you understand the priority that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman were putting on the tight end group when you first signed Will Dissly, who honestly got the biggest contract out of any free agent that the Chargers ended up signing.
It showed what was important to them, right? Like,
right.
Can we please block somebody?
Yes. And we've been wanting to see production as it relates to receiving from this tight end group for some time now. Obviously, I think Gerald Everett, unfortunately, was just underutilized in Kellen Moore's system, because when he got the ball last year, man, he was out to prove something. When he got the ball, he was plowing through people. The first guy was not able to bring Gerald Everett down. And when you were hoping that you'd get those 2 tight end sets between him and Donald Parham, that just didn't end up coming to fruition because, health reasons. They both weren't able to be out there. Then years prior before that, it was Donald Parham and Jared Clark that we thought was going to be productive, and that didn't end up coming to fruition either. So now you're in a much different system where obviously you have much stronger blocking tight end than the Chargers have had since the days of Steven Anderson. And from the standpoint of what we know so far about Donald Parham, him going into his possibly last season with the Chargers, he's already nursing an offseason injury, so he hasn't been able to get up to speed yet. Hopefully he will be by the time training camp starts. So yeah, you look at Hayden Hurst, and a guy who has had experience in this Greg Roman offense, knows what needs to be done. You heard him from the first days of his press conference talking about training the agility, being able to go for 60 minutes, what the plan is going to be for this offense to succeed out there. And he says that he's ready to do it. And as you mentioned, Dan, for a position that you've just been wanting to see more production out of since Justin Herbert has been the quarterback of this team, it makes perfect sense. We talk about, we just talked about Joshua Palmer. Everybody's gearing towards Ladd McConkey, who's going to be running the football between Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Kind of in terms of under the radar, because those tight ends necessarily haven't been a focal point of the Chargers offense, or hell, I say focal point, but maybe you want to say even just a point in general, really, for the tight ends. Hayden Hurst gets kind of overlooked in that circumstance. So yeah, I think this is a very under the radar opportunity for him to have a career year. Obviously coming off of an injury, 100% healthy now, so you are still relying on that. It is a 1-year deal for him, so you're hoping that kind of reclamation project, getting back to his days of what he was in Baltimore, that could come back to this Chargers team. But I like that as an idea for a career year for Hayden Hurst.
Now this next one, I think, gives me chills to think of what that would look like. And Chargers fans, I think, would love to see a career year from one of the 2 captains of this entire team.
Let's hear it.
Could you imagine if Derwin James can get back to and eclipse his rookie season? And need I remind you, that rookie season, that all-pro season, that 4 tackles for a loss, 6 quarterback hits, 3.5 sacks, 3 interceptions. The guy was nails, came in day one as a leader, if not the leader on this Chargers team. And the sad part about this, and this is why this would be so exciting to see him go back to that form and better. According to PFF, again, this is not the gospel, but it just gives you a trend line. Every season since 2018, so 2018 to 19 to 21, 22, 23, every season he's played, his defensive grade has gone down. 87.8 elite grade on defense, 2018. 2019, 82. 2021, 78. 2022, 77. And then last year, 60. Imagine not just the micro of Derwin James back to Derwin James all-pro, Pro Bowl level, ball hawking, elite safety. But imagine what that does. We're talking, again, impacting this team's ability to succeed and to win. Imagine if that Derwin James returns to this Chargers team what that means to this secondary, to this pass rush, to this middle of the field, to the teeth of the defense. We've all wanted him to be utilized as that versatile chess piece. So we've heard Matt Money Smith talk about maybe less so in game, but week by week they change his roles and responsibilities. If we see a better version of Derwin James in 2018, that might be the one defender that can single-handedly lift the rest of the defense. Get Derwin James right, the rest of it is cooking, in my opinion.
One of the first things that Jesse Minter said to Derwin James when he was brought on as defensive coordinator was, let's get you back to being one of the best safeties in the league. Jesse Minter knows exactly how important Derwin James is to this defense. He knew it from day one. And to your point, Dan, all those PFF scores for Derwin that has dropped considerably over the years, you think about it, it's crazy to think that the best season obviously was his rookie season. And then you think about the coordinators that have been on this team since then. You go, basically, Gus Bradley was responsible for getting Derwin into his 2018 season. And since then, hasn't really been so good in the Brandon Staley system, especially last year. Way too many personal foul calls, penalties. I'm sure that helped drive the score down. Other aspects of it, I just think that this defense secondary in general, whatever plan was instituted that they wanted to execute on the field, the execution was horrible, in my opinion. And
some of it was on Derwin.
Yes, I'm not absolving him.
Not on Derwin.
Yeah, definitely not absolving him from anything that was done. But other aspects of going into that score in terms of the secondary, like, look, we won't sugarcoat what the Chargers secondary has looked like over the past couple of years because it hasn't looked good. But other aspects in terms of guys being out of position that Derwin has to cover for, or them putting way too much on his plate. There's a difference between putting Derwin James in the position where he can be Derwin and be the best version of himself. And then there's the argument of saying, well, Derwin's the leader. Let's just put everything we got on his shoulders. There is a difference between those two statements. As we know from Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter, they are going to put players, Derwin James, anybody else, in the best position that's going to make them their best. That's going to accentuate what they do best out on the field. Put them in a position to win, not to lose. So it is wild to say that, considering, first thought, it's like, well, Derwin is just Derwin. We know what he's capable of. We know how good he can be.
Yeah.
But to have him return to form in this defense, I don't think that you can understate how important that is. But on top of what you said, Dan, I don't think you could understate how big that would be to see him return to that form.
Yeah, because it brings the defense return to flexibility, allows them to switch up packages, and that would mean that they're succeeding in doing that. That's the big piece. And it's interesting because I liken it to what we're hearing about kind of that balanced approach for Justin, where we don't want to see him toting the rock 45, 50 times a game, just slinging all over the place and putting the Superman cape on all day long. That's not the best thing for this team. And I think that's kind of similar for Derwin. I think this coaching staff saw him and was so high on him for good reason. And he could do everything, but he can't do everything all at once. And he can't play multiple positions at one time. And so what can this team and the staff do to put Derwin in the best position to succeed week over week? And let him focus, because it did seem like at times that he was just fried. It just seemed like he was trying to do too many things, was asked to do too many things. And then that's where some of maybe it's frustration, maybe it's the lack of attention. I don't know. But we didn't see the Derwin we're accustomed to seeing last year or the year before. We just didn't. Glimpses, sure, but consistently, no. So Derwin, of all the people on this list that we're going to talk about today, that one might be the one that would bring the most impact to this team's success this year. Give Derwin an all-pro season that eclipses his rookie year. I don't see how this defense is not absolutely cooking in 2024. Who's next? Who's on your list?
Let's go to the offensive line, Dan.
Okay. This is one, Jake, I'll let you take the lead on this. There's a lot riding on a lot of players on this offensive line. You could argue there might be more riding on Trey Pipkins than anybody else.
Yeah, you could put Trey Pipkins along in the same argument with Daiyan Johnson, for example, in terms of where they should be at certain points of their careers. You know, Zion, we were hoping that moving back to his natural spot at left guard that he was going to have a better year. Just unfortunately, that didn't happen yet. I'm really excited for Zion this year because we've watched his transition just from a body standpoint over the past few months. Wow. Ben Herbert must have saw Zion in the offseason and said, that guy,
I like you.
I'm going to turn him into a bulldozer. My God. But Trey Pipkins is one that 2 years ago, you felt Trey earned that second contract because contract year at right tackle 2 seasons ago, he had his best season that he had. Now, however you want to measure that, we're not talking about an all-pro season, but he did well enough from the standpoint to say, yes, earned that second contract as it relates to other offensive linemen that are out there, and ended up being more considerably favorable for the Chargers financially. And then, unfortunately, last year, there was a little bit of a revert back to the Trey Pipkins that we saw during his first few years with the team. Now, Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman go out, first-round pick, you draft Joe Alt, and you say, okay, so what are you going to do with Trey Pipkins? Are you going to make him one of the most expensive backup offensive linemen in the league? No. We're going to try to remold this guy. We're going to try to put this guy in a position where he can win. So you kick him over to right guard. Now, this is tough because we haven't seen Trey Pipkins play in this position during his career. So there's not a lot to go off of. But in terms of what does that mean in terms of impact for the team if Trey Pipkins is able to solidify his place in this offensive line at right guard? Huge. It's just as considerably important for this team to succeed if he's able to succeed on his own, but it's also considerably important for him if he doesn't. Because we've been on both sides of coin with this. I know we're talking about the potential for a career year for Trey Pipkins, but he's been on other lists of ours that have not been very favorable heading on to this year. So in terms of what the plan was from Jim Harbaugh from day one to solidify this offensive line and protect your most important asset in Justin Herbert, there were a lot of things that needed to be done. From the center to the right tackle, you have guys in different positions or new faces. Bradley Bozeman, Trey Pipkins, Joe Alt. Considerably important for Justin Herbert to succeed. We've all seen what Trey Pipkins has or hasn't done when he's had to go up against Max Crosby. It wasn't there last year. So instead of trying it again at that standpoint and try to develop him better as a right tackle, put him somewhere where you can stand next to a 6'8" rookie offensive tackle. I've talked to you, Dan. I've said this on the show a few times. Last year, when the offensive line was Jamari Sawyer and Trey Pipkins, that was a lot of beef on the right side of that line. It's crazy to me that watching what we're going to see in just a couple weeks with Joe Alt out there is going to look that much bigger. It's wild.
Yeah.
But to now put him with a veteran to his left in Bradley Bozeman at the center position, and with a guy the size of Joe Alt there, I think having two guys on either side of Trey Pipkins in this circumstance while developing this new aspect of his game at the guard position, I think has the chance to be a real benefit for him and the entirety of this offensive line. So the barometer, thankfully for him, is not too high to eclipse if we're talking about a career year. But it might be the most important one of anybody that we talk to on this list if you fast forward to next April. And what are the Chargers putting their first draft priority on? Are they going offensive line again because they need to? Or can they go a different position because they found the right way to use Trey Pipkins?
Yeah, and it's interesting, like looking at some of the stats and stuff, like for Trey Pipkins, 2022 only gave up 3 sacks and 9 hits, 20 hurries. And in 2023, while he had maybe, I think, like 150-ish more snaps, tripled the amount of sacks. He gave 9 sacks versus 3 last year. 9 sacks last year, 7 penalties. That's the part. And the thing that we saw was like they came at really bad times. But overall, his overall pass blocking grade last year was better than 2022. But it was the flashes. It was the valleys that were really bad. And that's, I think, what people remembered. But like I don't think Trey Pipkins was really the biggest issue in pass protection. Like there were bigger issues in pass protection than Trey Pipkins. But let's not kid ourselves here. You talked about like the beef, right? Like Trey Pipkins is still 6'6", 300 plus as a guard next to Joe Alt. And Bradley, like you said, that's a wall. Like they're going Game of Thrones status here. And if that can work out, huge impact. And again, that impacts everything on offense: pass protection, run blocking, passing, you name it. And most importantly, protecting Justin Herbert. So I would love to see him succeed. And then that just makes me wonder, do they bring him back then? Say he balls out.
Well, you still have 1 year left on his contract if he does.
Mm-hmm.
But if he doesn't...
It's a big price tag.
But if he doesn't...
I mean, that's an easy question then.
Right.
Yeah. Next one. And I think you and I talked about this a couple episodes ago when we were going through... I forget the episode topic, but could you imagine a world in which J.K. Dobbins eclipses 1,000 yards, to call it, I don't know, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5.8 yards a carry? What that would mean for this Chargers offense?
Oh, wow.
Could you imagine a bell cow? When's the last time we saw that?
Here's my thing on the term bell cow. I know everybody would like to say that in terms of where the running game is going and you need to go out and you need to secure a bell cow running back. But honestly, now I'm not saying it's J.K. Dobbins not capable of doing stuff like that. Of course. Sure. But the days of the 3-down running back are slowly dying. Derrick Henry is
a handful of them.
Derrick Henry is one of the few that are still productive, and it's even amazing for as long as he's been in the league how productive he still can be because he's just
McCaffrey's
so massive. Yes.
Yeah.
But those days are whittling down. And if you didn't have the likes of Gus Edwards and you didn't just go out and draft Kamani Vidal, I would probably agree with you, Dan, that those stats seem pretty good. It's a pretty nice target to put on. But again, there's only one football.
I mean, realistically, hell, if any running back had 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns.
I mean, hell, I'm not sitting here saying that I don't want to see it or that I don't think that it's possible. But J.K. Dobbins, and we've heard Chris Harry, for the pronunciation police out there, Chris Harry, even call his shot that he believes that if it comes down to week 1 and J.K. Dobbins is fully healthy, that he's going to be the number 1 running back in this system and not Gus Edwards. I'm so interested in the dynamic between how this running back room is going to be utilized because you saw it in Baltimore. Even if it wasn't J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards was still getting majority of the totes inside the 10-yard line. He was essentially the goal line back.
I'd love to see the Michael Turner LT split.
Yes, and that's what I think we're going to get shades of in this, Dan. Because Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh talk about how they're going to run the ball, but the best part about it is that their goals are also to keep guys fresh. Keep guys fresh in this. So it's not going to what running back is the defense going to see on 2nd and 10 or 1st and 5 or 3rd and 8? Is it going to be Edwards, Dobbins, Vidal, possibly even Spiller? That's their plan, Dan. And the best part about it is that all 4 of these guys have the style to fit in this offense, but all 4 of them are so different in what they could bring to the table. And that's what's exciting.
All right, so let's shift this then. So J.K. Dobbins, his career year, 890 yards, I think it was 9 or 10 touchdowns. And then you go to Gus Edwards, his banner year was, I believe it was last year, technically, although see, you can go both ways, because last year 198 attempts, 800 plus yards, and 13 touchdowns, but that was 198 attempts at 4.1 yards per carry. Earlier seasons, every one of them was above 5 yards a carry. So I'll go back to 2020, 144 attempts, 723 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So if we combine the two and say 1,900 yards and 18 touchdowns, that combined, playoffs, book it. Literally book it. I would almost guarantee you this team makes the playoffs if they go 1,800 yards or 1,900 yards between the two of them.
Back to your original question here as it relates to focusing in on J.K. Dobbins. He has the most potential to do that out of this running game. I don't think that there's any question, no argument out of that. Because he's more explosive than any one of the other 3 guys that are currently in that running back stable. When he gets the ball and it's one cut and go for him, he can churn the yards. Gus is great as a short yardage back, and he can get those tough yards that you need to in order to get things going for your offense. And obviously he could be a touchdown machine when you get inside the 10-yard line. So great benefit for your team. But JK's got that extra juice. And in terms of the potential, if we're keeping it in this conversation about which career years could benefit the Chargers, I like the way you phrased it, Dan. If you can get those stats out of just Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, forget the other 2 running backs. That's just those 2. That's huge for Justin Herbert, this offense, and overall your win-loss record.
Yeah. So a couple names that I don't think we have on this list, but they could be. One of which I think is a name that a lot of Chargers fans are really, really excited about, Daiyan Henley. I think everyone is hoping and pleading to see him on the field starting. But, a career year for Daiyan Henley, if we're being honest, would be like 45 snaps, right? I don't know literally, but he basically didn't play.
This is a redshirt season.
Yeah. So I kind of see that similarly to a Quentin Johnston too, which maybe some people might be like, oh man, if Quentin Johnston breaks out and has a career year, quote unquote, this team is, going crazy. But like when your career year has to be more than what they did those years, that's not really a career year, right? Like that's not what we're talking about here. 2 players though, that I think both are probably dueling for a secondary contract, no pun intended in secondary, Asante Samuel Jr. and Kristian Fulton. I believe both, for different reasons. If these 2, either one of them, can have a breakout or career year, that would temper or would dismiss so much angst and worry and concern and fear that I have about this secondary, specifically the cornerback room, as it stands today. And Asante Samuel Jr. has been a crowd favorite for a long time, and for good reason. We've talked about his game plenty on this show. He had more interceptions in one game than he did in an entire season throughout any part of his career. 3 interceptions in the playoffs, more than any other season. He's had 2 interceptions back-to-back-to-back years. That's underwhelming for a player of what we believe is his potential. And Kristian Fulton, while he's had some years that were good, or he had 1 year, I should say, that was really good, the rest has been underwhelming. But what is important to me in this conversation is what the team currently has at cornerback right now. One of these guys better have a career year, or else this team is in a whole lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah.
This team desperately needs a cornerback 1. And of these two, I kind of want it to be Kristian Fulton because he has the size. And if that were to happen, then it kind of allows Asante Samuel Jr. to kind of slot in as that CB2-3. Maybe they bring in somebody else. I don't know. But it kind of feels like there's maybe more riding on Kristian Fulton having a bounce back career season than Asante right now. Because who else is the size of Kristian Fulton that has any meaningful snaps in the NFL? Like you're talking Dean Leonard, Cam Hart, Jazir Taylor, Tarheeb Still. Like, do you trust any of them to do what he can do? I don't. This one hurts. Like, there's so much riding on these two. But I don't know which one of these needs. I don't know which one of these would bring the bigger impact.
I think you phrased it perfectly. You better hope that at least one of these guys has it. And I think the reason to be optimistic about that, Dan, say what you will about Asante Samuel Jr.'s first 3 years with the team. I like the way that you phrased it in terms of a fan favorite for a variety of different reasons, but not flawless, not without his weaknesses, which have been criticized on this show, on other shows, when it comes to the tackling and being a little bit more physical. I think part of that he knows that he's responsible for, but the other part of it, we know what type of scheme that he's been in since he stepped foot in the NFL. It's the scheme that I think that has that potential to bring Asante Samuel Jr. to the level that we all thought that we were getting during those first couple of years and just didn't, great in flashes, just didn't end up getting to where it needed to be. And again, much for the same reason that I feel really optimistic about Joshua Palmer to be the successor in the wide receiver room, same reason for Asante. I love the addition of Kristian Fulton. I think that is a under the radar, low risk, potentially high reward signing for him. He did not mince words in his press conference for the issues that he was responsible for, and then some of the environment and the things that took place that were unfortunate while he was in Tennessee. He's looking for that bounce back year. And at 26 years old, he has all the potential to do that. And to your point, Dan, yes, the size fits that scheme the best. And for the Chargers, who have just at the same time to go through the J.C. Jackson debacle, on top of Michael Davis having another down year, it absolutely crippled this secondary because your rookies weren't where they needed to be. Your second-year players weren't where they needed to be in terms of taking that next step and benefiting. It's huge for both of these guys. I think if I was to put money, though, on which one that I would expect to have the better year, I still have to go with Asante.
I think you're right.
I have to go with Asante.
I think you're right.
And the other part about this is, Dan, is that, going through Kristian Fulton's history, the bar isn't necessarily set too high for what he has to eclipse. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily that you have to have both of these guys thrive, even though I personally think you can, based off of their motivations. One's trying to resurrect his rocky career that he's had so far since he's been in the NFL. The other one's in a contract year and trying to earn that second contract. Different reasons. I think they are both highly motivated to go out there and produce. But I think Asante's familiarity already with the guys that he knows that he's playing with, what Jesse Minter wants from him in this defense, I think he's got the potential to have that career year over Kristian Fulton. I still both think that they could be productive, but I think Asante has the better chance of doing so.
Yeah, and you weren't kidding about like just the absolute failures in the secondary from a roster construction perspective. Like you talked about the JC Jackson debacle, then Mike Davis went down, and you look at what they didn't do in mid-season to bring anybody in. I mean, we're looking at Asang Bassi and Jalen Hawkins as like the guys that they brought in to be your savior. You had Dean Leonard, Jazir Taylor, 6th and 7th round draft picks coming in to do things. That should not be happening for a team that has playoff or Super Bowl aspirations. That's what you're left with. And so right now, even, as high as we are on Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart, that I don't know how anybody can feel confident in this cornerback room right now.
Great question, Dan. If you want to dispel some of the worry, I encourage everybody to go back and watch the press conference with Steve Klingscale, because honestly, that did a lot for me to listen to how he wants to utilize these guys in the secondary, have every single one of them to be versatile. He was even asked about Kristian Fulton. He said, do you see him as the outside guy? He's like, no, I honestly see him as being able to do both, play in the nickel and outside. We already know Asante Samuel Jr. can do that. So that's one of the reasons that I feel like he's got the most potential, because of his versatility. He's honestly more versatile than anybody in that cornerback room. I don't think anybody would argue that. But that's the other part of it, Dan, that makes me feel better about the potential with this secondary. Go back and watch the press conference with Steve Klingscale and tell yourself that doesn't get you fired up or optimistic about what he's going to bring to the secondary room.
But I think that's what, and maybe I've just been jaded, right? I've been burned too many times.
Totally understand.
But how many years are we going to go into this basing it off of hope and coach speak?
Listen to me being one of the people that talk about that. It's hilarious. And this is a Chargers podcast where basically we've been talking about hope for too damn long.
But in a position group that I think you have to have production.
Gotta have it.
We're basing this solely off of hope and coaching. Speak. That's what we're basing it off of. And maybe a season or two from one of these guys that we've seen, maybe we can go back to that.
Look, we have talked about the X factor that's been missing from this Chargers team be coaching on a number of different occasions. And we've talked about how we expect Jim Harbaugh to fill that void. If we're going to centralize this as it relates to the secondary, I think just all the stars here are going to align. We mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. wants a second contract. Kristian Fulton wants to resurrect his career for what it's been the past few years. Steve Klingscale knows exactly what Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh want to do. And to your point, Dan, the reason you feel jaded is because you had 3 years in the same defensive system that never changed. And for Kristian Fulton, sometimes a change is good for the career. For existing players on this team, sometimes change is good. We kind of heard that alluded to during the press conferences of Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Derwin James, when they were talking about what took place last year. So, Dan, it's amazing what a coach like this and a system like this and the rest of the assistant coaches like this do for you because of what they've accomplished together already over a period of time. Now to bring that into the pros, not saying it's going to yield the same results, but again, as specifically as it relates to the secondary, it's hard to get any worse. It's true. So, hell yeah. I might be putting my aspirations here to some hope and to some motivation, but damn it. Don't really got anything else right now.
Yeah. So I think that's That's what's so, I don't know, it's so intriguing about this team is there are so many guys who have prove-it contracts or have been unproven so far in their careers, and guys who are going to be relied upon to make big impacts on this team. But then the flip side of that is if they can grab that by the horns and relish in that opportunity, these guys, there are so many who can make a truckload of money this year. And so there's incentives all the way around to make this right and to get this right. And whether that means these guys are on this team next year or not, they have to have a good year this year in order to get on any team next year for some of these guys. So there are some career years incoming on this team. I am almost certain of it. But what we wanted to do was go through some of the names where if they were to happen, these would be the ones that we think would impact this team's ability to win football games the most. Any other maybe honorable mentions that we didn't highlight here they want to touch on before we head out?
I mean, kind of in the same vein as Derwin James, like, I don't think that anybody would say, like, oh, that Rashawn Slater needs a career year. But something tells me that you're going to get it, which is wild considering how good he's been since he's been in the league. But Dan, in this system, we already know that they've picked up his fifth-year option. I don't think he cared. I think he wants that contract after next year or after this season's done with, and I think he's going to get it. I think the results are going to speak for themselves when we see him out there on the field.
Yeah, maybe a little unrealistic, but Poona Ford could be on this honorable mentions list. How many question marks there are on the interior?
How about Tito? I think Tito's one that you've been kind of waiting for, and when he's been healthy, he's been one of the better run blocking defensive linemen that you have.
Yeah, he had a stretch of like 3 games that he was productive, really, and then he got hurt. So like that's why I don't have him on that list because there's really not much for us to go by.
The bar's low. I get that. Yes.
Alohi Gilman, like I think a banner year. We saw what that looked like, and he was kind of one of the guys that steadied the ship last year. From a special teams perspective, though, which I could totally see this happening. I know Darius Davis made the second team All-Pro as a rookie, but imagine if he increased that again, especially now with the new rules and formatting of kickoff returns and stuff. I mean, you can see it happening. That's just extra points on the board.
I mean, what are the expectations for Tuli heading into his second year? I think that they're good based off of what you saw in his rookie season.
Yep.
And everybody's now so excited with the Chargers now having 4 deep at the edge position to go off of. I think the potential for him to have a career year is definitely there for him. And you're going to need it from the pass rusher standpoint because we know Jesse Minter is going to want all 4 of these guys to get after the quarterback.
Yep. Yeah. Imagine if like Bud Dupree ends up having like 13 sacks or something. Like
bring him back to a situational pass rusher, which was basically how he was slated when he first came into the league, then developed into more of a starter benefit for him. And to have the season that he had, even at his age last year, and now he's coming in as edge 4, it's still crazy to me. I think that is such a savvy move by Joe Ortiz to bring him in and adds to strengthen that edge group that really needed it.
Yeah. So look, we're, I think 8 days away, Jake, which is wild. 8 days, I believe, from rookies reporting to training camp. And then a week after that, everyone else does. Jake, you and I will be there to some extent throughout the off season as we go towards training camp. So look for us out there. We got some fun things planned. Anything else on this one, Jake? I know we went through a bunch of names here. Exciting times for Chargers fans. Exciting careers potentially on the rise for a lot of these players.
Is it August 10th yet? Is it July 24th yet?
Nope.
No. Damn. I got nothing to add. Just know that I'm wallowing in despair.
No, it's not. But until then, you can find Jake at Jake D. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. For Jake, I'm Dan. This is Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.